everyone. Thank you for attending the 2022 Metroplex Bible Teachers Workshop. My name is Jandel Crutchfield, and I am a member of the Marsalis Avenue Church of Christ. I also am a professor of social work at the University of Texas at Arlington. My family and I have been here for about 4 years. We've been enjoying it, and we love our congregation at Marsalis Avenue. And so today I'm here to share with you some of the best practices for being a Bible school teacher. And this would apply to teaching students in elementary, middle, high school, or even adults. And so hopefully today you'll walk away with some helpful tips and strategies to be able to make sure that you use best practices in your classroom. The last time I met with you all, we talked about virtual strategies of teaching. And so it's been good to be back in person. And so many of you all are. So a lot of these strategies are for in-person learning, but they can be applied virtually as well. So today we're going to talk about 4 key strategies, which are preparation, communication, discussion, and innovation. And the ION at the end of each word means that it's ongoing. So these are things that you're doing continuously as a Bible study teacher. So we'll be talking about preparation, communication, discussion, and innovation. So everybody knows what it's like to feel unprepared for something. And so the very first thing that you can do as a Bible study teacher is to make sure that you are prepared. And a lot of times you're able to get information about who is going to be in your class. And so the class registration is a very important part of your preparation as a Bible study teacher. So if you get the list of names, the list of contact numbers for your students, you can send out something ahead of time to let people know who you are, at least a week before. Hi, I am Sister Jandel Crutchfield. I will be your teacher for this quarter. This is the topic. This is what you need to bring to class. Make sure you have a Bible. Make sure you have a notebook. Make sure that you know where our classroom is. So as much information that you can provide ahead of time helps not only your students to be prepared, but it helps you to be prepared as well. And so when you're thinking about that class registration, that number, you probably want to prepare enough handouts and materials +5 for people that are going to show up, for people that didn't register ahead of time, to make sure that you have all the materials from the lesson. If you're in elementary, middle, or high, you have those manipulatives, the different things that you might build or cut out for that day, making sure you have a +5. And so in addition to preparing that list, preparing for the numbers, preparing by sending out information, you're going to want to look at your actual classroom if you're in person. If you're virtual, then you're using the Zoom space, but you still want to be comfortable in that space, in whatever online space you're using. But you want to go to your classroom at least a week before to check and see what it looks like. Where do you think your students are going to sit? How are they going to come into class? How are you going to greet them? Are you going to stand outside of the door to shake their hand and say, hello, welcome in? Are you going to be standing at the front of the room as they come in? Where do you want them to sit? And a lot of times, if that classroom is not being used between that week that you're exploring and the week that you'll start class, you can set that up ahead of time. If it will be used, just try to get there early on the very first day of class to set it up the way you want. So it's important that you actually look at the space that you're using to know how best to set it up for all of the students that you're going to have. Do you need extra chairs? Do you have enough based on the class registration that you used before? So all of these things will help you. And this is all stuff that is done before you even start class. So being prepared ahead of time. You also want to be prepared, and this is clear. We know as Bible study teachers that we have to be able to prepare the lesson. So one of the things I think that we often overlook is to think about our teaching styles. Many of us have different teaching styles. Some of us like to script or write everything. There are a lot of manuals and teacher's guides that will give you everything that you need to say. And so if you are somebody that likes to follow a script, you need to know that so you can get your script together ahead of time. If you are more free flowing, you definitely still want to have an outline so that you know what it is that you're going to be discussing and talking about, the scriptures that you will be using, the questions that you will be asking. All of that needs to be prepared well in advance of your class. And I would also suggest that you walk through your lesson with timing. So if most of us have about 45 minutes of actual learning. And so don't overestimate with the hour. By the time students get there, you say opening prayers, you have to wrap up. That's about 15 minutes shaved off of the actual learning. So target about 40, 45 minutes of concrete learning and walk through that with timing. So don't just say, I think I'll be able to do this, that, and the other, but actually try to say, okay, class, we're here today. We're going to say an opening prayer. Give yourself a time for that. Then use your opening statement or your introduction, your icebreaker. Time it and see how long that's going to take. That will just only make sure that your class session goes as smoothly as possible, will be as engaging as possible, that you'll meet all of the metrics and the goals that you're trying to meet. All of us have probably been there when we say, I didn't get to this in class today. And sometimes that happens, but sometimes our preparation can help avoid that if we know that one discussion is going to take a little bit longer, or if we pre-plan that getting through the lecture portion of what we're doing is going to take longer than we think. So sometimes that planning can help us make sure we hit everything that we want to, so we don't have to push it to the next week. So in preparation, you also want to talk about on your first day what your norms and expectations are for class. And that might mean we hope everybody shows up with their Bibles. We hope everybody shows up on time. There will be homework outside of class. We would like you to read things, or we would like you to gather information. We would like you to come prepared for this. We will ask questions throughout if you have a question, or maybe there's a question time. So all of those different things help your students to be able to know how to show up to your class. So that way, again, you maximize the time. If I know that I have to write down my questions and save them for the end, that's what I'm going to do. And I won't, raise my hand during the lesson, get us off track, or things like that. So you're thinking about norms and expectations. And you typically don't have to say things like, be kind to other Christians, but you may even want to talk about, if somebody else is talking, let's make sure we're giving them our attention, things like that. All right, so we also want to talk about consistency, right? We're preparing with consistency. So each time we have to prepare a lesson, we're doing that consistently. We're showing up to our classes at the same times consistently. We're formatting our lessons consistently. And so that is part of the preparation, and it's for the broader quarter or the length of time that you're teaching. So not necessarily just for day one, but each time we meet, I'm prepared in this way as a teacher. And then you also want to prepare for the unexpected. When you have prepared for 10 students and you end up having 20 students that show up, that is something that you can potentially think of. Maybe there's a special day, right? If you're teaching on Easter Sunday or Mother's Day week, Christmas, those days tend to be in flux, and maybe there are more people in your Bible studies, right? Preparing for visitors, people who are not Christians. You might have questions about the topic that you're teaching. Maybe you prepare a response that says, you know what, I'm going to get with you after class so we can go into that more in depth. So that way we can continue to go through our lessons. So those typical things that you can think about that might actually happen in a classroom, but you don't necessarily plan for them regularly, prepare for those. That's a really good strategy to think of. Somebody hasn't brought their lesson or their book or their homework or their Bible. What are your responses going to be? Nowadays, a lot of people have smart devices. So, hey, pull up your Bible on your phone. If it's a child, maybe you have extra Bibles that you can share with them. So preparing for the unexpected is also part of preparation. All right, so we're going to move now into communication. Are you ready to communicate with those who you will be teaching? And so there is to say that there's never too much communication. There's no such thing as over communicating. I think I said this already. Well, I've been telling you this over and over. There's no such thing as over communication when it comes to Bible study, because things need to be repeated often for people to understand them. But communication is really the way that Bible study teachers are effective. And so in our communication, we want to be responsive. So if people are sending us text messages or emails or ask us to get them information about something, we want to respond. So all of us are busy. And if you commit to being a Bible study teacher, you're realizing that part of that busyness is going to be responding to your students. And so the classroom experience is enhanced, it improves when people feel like you are, as a teacher, are responsive to them, answering their questions. And even if it is, hey, everyone, we didn't get to this in class, so I'll take 10 minutes after the bell if you want to stay around for me to answer these, or we'll start the next class answering these. So it doesn't have to be perfect and immediate. Responsive just means that you are eventually getting around to what people want you to do or questions that they have in a good amount of time. All right, so we're going to review those norms regularly. Remember, if we talked about bringing your Bibles to class, everyone, don't forget. We talked about letting people take turns when they have something to say, and we listen and we make sure we're respectful. Don't forget that. We want to keep that in mind. So people need a reminder. And so that goes back to never being too much in terms of that communication and remembering things. Also making it plain. Some topics in Bible study are very challenging for learners. There's a lot of advanced stuff, particularly at Marsalis Avenue, that we talked about, covenants and understanding all of those dynamics in the Bible and learning Greek. But the more we can make it plain for people, the better their learning experience. If they leave confused, that doesn't help in their learning. And so even if you need some type of aid, we're going to talk about innovation in a little bit to help bring your point home. You want to put things, as they say, in tennis shoes, right? And so make it plain as much as you can. A lot of times in the resource guides, there are examples to real life. That's a good way to try to make it plain, not just having things be theoretical or for just learning's sake, but how does this apply to my life? That's a good strategy. I wrote this twice. Don't assume, say and ask. Don't assume, say and ask, because this is really important. We can't assume what our students do know or what they are learning. Say what we want them to learn and then ask if they get it, right? Or if we want to know something about our students or what they think about a topic, we can ask them. Don't assume in class, a class that's full of different people, that people are having the same experience, the same thought, or even the same response to your lesson. So checking, communication is, okay, we've been talking about this for 10 minutes. Let's do a check in terms of how people are doing. How are people processing this, right? Are you getting it? Does it make sense? So doing that temperature check and not just assuming, okay, people have it, there's no question, so that means we're fine. Don't assume, say what you're thinking, what you mean, and ask for feedback. All right, so discussion is the next ION here. And discussion is so important. It's the difference between a Bible study class and a lecture. So as a professor, I do many lectures, but I also teach classes that involve discussion. And so the difference is, obviously, if I, as a teacher, as a Bible study teacher, as a professor, am doing all of the talking, that's not a Bible study class, that's not a lecture. I mean, that is more of a lecture. It's more of a sermon if you are preaching and you don't allow questions or discussion. So discussion is a really basic, fundamental thing about Bible study. And so as the teacher, you are there to facilitate that discussion. And so what I like to describe as the 50-50 rule can help us. So if there is a class that's about 40 to 45 minutes long, we should be preparing about 20 minutes of content ourselves to share. And then we should expect 20 minutes of discussion. the 50-50 rule. Remember, this is not the sermon. This is not a lecture. It's Bible study where we want people to actually have a learning outcome. They need to learn something. And so that often involves discussing the things that they are hearing in Bible study. And so discussions are going to look different, right? An elementary school discussion will maybe look like children responding in songs or having to be guided through a lot more, obviously, than an adult class. Adults will have more spontaneous discussion and be able to talk. But the 50-50 rule is there. I talk as the Bible study teacher for 50% of the time, and I want my students to talk for the other 50% of the time. So remember that in your preparation. If you're preparing 30 minutes worth of talking or material and you have a 40-minute class, that only gives 10 minutes for discussion. So that's violating that 50-50 rule. All right, and so you're building in discussion prompts potentially to start class or to check for understanding. So there's several different ways to build in discussion. A lot of times, again, those teachers' guides, they give you a way to build in discussion and get feedback, but a really helpful way, particularly for, high school to adult, even middle school, is to start with a prompt, to start with the discussion prompt. And on the next slide, we'll give some examples. But so, on your slide, you are on your board, you're writing a question for your class to consider as they come in. And so the first 5 minutes of the class, people are reflecting. Maybe they're talking in small groups, or they're just reflecting themselves as you welcome them in. As you all say prayers, they are reflecting on this. So it gets their attention to the topic for the day, but in a way that they can immediately engage in discussion. So that they're not going to sit back. A lot of people have the posture of, okay, I'm coming to Bible class. I'll be sitting here for about 20 minutes, hearing things, and I don't really have to engage. A discussion prompt causes them to immediately engage because I have to answer this question. I have to think about what I'm going to say. So discussion prompts to start class are a really helpful way to build in some of that discussion. Discussion prompts to check for understanding are very, very useful as well. Rather than just saying, do you guys understand? Give them a scenario to say, okay, so if we're talking about walking down the straight and narrow way, what does that actually look like for you at work? What does that look like for you at school? What does that look like for you at home with your parents or in the community? Give some examples to make sure they understand what it is that you just learned. And I think doing both helps you with that 50-50 rule. So if you build those questions in and those times in, you're clocking that time for discussion to make sure you are keeping up with. Half the time I'm talking as the Bible study teacher, half the time students are talking. All right, small groups. I mentioned this just a second ago, and this is a really easy way to spark discussion among Bible study students. A lot of times people are reluctant to raise their hands and participate in the larger group. So let's say you have 20 students in your class. Someone may not raise their hand to talk in that group of 20, but if they're in a group of 5, they might be talking. And so it's not necessary for all of our students to talk all of the time in front of everyone. And you've been there probably as a Bible study teacher where you said, who has a response? Can somebody answer this question for me? What do y'all think about that? And there's dead silence. Or there's one person that always responds. Small groups are a way to try to break up that silence and that monotony and that reluctance to share, because there's less people to potentially hear your thinking if it's not the right thinking. Not everybody's as confident in their Bible knowledge or their thinking. So break people up into smaller groups. Okay, so this section of the room is going to be in group A, this section group B, C, and D. And I want you guys to take this discussion question to your groups. And then you can have people share out, one person who might be, more talkative or more willing to share, but they also probably are more willing to share because it's not just their idea. People are really self-conscious. And so if I've been in a group of 5 people talking, I can raise my hand and say, well, our group talked about this instead of I think this. So small groups are a great way to make sure you're achieving that 50-50 rule. If you feel like people will not raise their hands to answer a discussion themselves, Give them 10 minutes in a discussion group, a small group. That's already 10 of 40 minutes. And then them sharing out is really a part of them getting the lesson and getting to know each other better. That's part of Bible study as well, is facilitating relationships between our students. That's a great way to do that, is by letting them have their own small group discussions. And then again, the real life application questions I mentioned on the communication page, by making it plain. Remember, for my life, when I leave this Bible class, what is it that I can take and apply to my own life? So what is the real life application? And it's more challenging depending on your topic. Some topics for Bible study are pretty practical, a marriage class, a singles group, women's, men's, but topics again on studying the Psalms or studying the letters, differences in the New Testament, the Greek. Those things are not for just study or Bible knowledge. They have to some way tie in to real life. And that just might be, how does this impact your adoration for God? Think about how he made all of this come together and all of the things that happen behind the scenes, and these letters and these covenants all fit together nicely. How does that impact your adoration for God? Let's talk about it in small groups, and then we'll share. So adoration for God is a real life thing. And sometimes that may be the biggest stretch you can have, because some of these topics in Bible study are really philosophical. So it's important to talk about the philosophical topics and questions, but we have to still make it apply to people's real life, what they're dealing with. And those, if you think about it, are sermons that people really respond to. It's the same in worship, that people respond to those sermons, that they're like, yes, I got nuggets from this, from my life. And even if that is, well, I adore God even more. I understand his sacrifice, so I appreciate it more. That's still a personal thing for life. So lots of ideas in terms of discussion. This next page is going to give us some discussion prompts. So here are some suggestions if you want to, again, use your screen. A lot of us have technology. If you want to just write it on the board for students, you may hand out papers, right? If you want to use good old-fashioned paper, people use paper anymore, print it out and make copies of it with the discussion prompt at the top. For elementary, middle school students, let them have a journal. And so every time they come to class, they get their journal and they write the new discussion prompt in it and they respond to it. They share in small groups or they share with you, and then you use that to incorporate for the next time. Well, last time I noticed you guys talked about this in your discussion prompts. Let's tackle that further. So it's still, even though they're writing the discussion prompts, they still are discussing, if that makes sense. So written words from your students are still their words. They are still discussing whatever the topic is. And so you can have them read from their journals. Again, it's about confidence for a lot of students and feeling confident and sharing their ideas. And so sometimes not having to think on their feet, but just being able to read from their journals or from what they wrote down might help them improve that discussion. So how do current events relate to the topic? That's a big one. Think about what's going on in the world. There's always something happening in the world that will catch our eye. And so if we're talking about patience under fire, or under stressful times, how can we bring in a current event that might be that? The pandemic has been that a lot for us. And so bringing that in, what has it been like to transition now from virtual things back to in-person things? And if the topic is faith, how has that required your faith? So bringing in those current events, applying the lesson to your life from last week, that's a good prompt. And so to put up on the board or to print out in their journals. Last week, we talked about John and his faith that Jesus would be coming, right? And that he would be the one to baptize him. And so did you apply that lesson of faith and obedience to your life last week? How did you do that? That's kind of a review, but it's getting people to think and discuss. Maybe what's one thing you didn't get to share or a thought last week during class? So a lot of times, if it's an especially good lesson, people have thoughts about it all during the week. I wish I would have said this. Oh, well, after we left class, I thought about it this way. I was driving by McDonald's and it made me think of something from the lesson. That's a good prompt to open up your classes with, to say, okay, well, last week I didn't get to share this and I really wanted to. Good way to start discussion. Or one of the things that I like to do is to have a photo to respond to. So again, it could be one of those current events. It could be a photo of anything related to your lesson. It could be one of the older scriptural photos, biblical photos. It could be a photo of the Nile River. It could be a photo of Pharaoh and the Egyptians, or what we think they look like, right? And asking people to respond to it. What do you think about this photo? What is this a picture of? How do you think this relates to what we might be talking about today? Again, switching it up, but allowing people, again, to give you their words, either in writing, especially for young kids. I think that's helpful, or just to go around in small groups and talk about it. But it immediately gives you help with that 50-50 rule to be able to say, okay, for 5 minutes, we're going to look at this prompt and respond to it. All right. So we've gone through preparation, communication, discussion. And now we want to talk lastly about innovation. And if we hadn't been pushed to be innovative over the last 2 years, I don't know what will push us there. But there are ways to be innovative even in coming back to class, and some things that we picked up during the pandemic that we probably need to keep around. So innovation is, I think, the difference between, right? So all of the great preparation, the great communication, the great discussion is fantastic for a Bible study teacher. But when you have really deep connections with your students, students love to come to your class and they learn a lot, is when you're innovative. And so that's why I saved this slide for last. You got the basic fundamentals down, and now you can try to be innovative. And so it's a challenge. I would like to say that it is a journey. It's a spectrum. If you're a brand new Bible study teacher, you might be trying to stick to the script of what you have and making sure that you can actually just get through this lesson. And that is welcome, because again, you're following a script, you're learning your teaching style, you're learning your students, you're learning the art of this. And so you can add as you go along. You can add better preparation. You can add more communication. You can add more discussion. These are things that are flexible and you can improve continuously. And so if you've been teaching for a while, definitely want to think about how you can be more innovative. And so innovation just increases, again, the engagement with class, the engagement with your students, and their engagement with the material that they're learning. So here's a couple ideas of ways to be innovative. These things called exit tickets. And so if you're a classroom teacher in public school, you probably have heard of this. If not, it's just another way to check for knowledge, but it's really tangible. And so it's something that students have to think about and prepare for. So it can be an action, and you guys have done this before. An action that says, one thing that I'm going to do this week to make sure I prioritize prayer. And so before students leave the class, they have to either show that to you written down, or they have to leave the room telling you what that is. It's an exit ticket. So a ticket to get out of the room is you answer this question, or you take this action, right? 2 people that I'm going to pray for this week, write it down. That's your exit ticket. One way that I'm going to be more grateful to my parents, take that and exit the room with that information. And so a lot of Bible classes and materials already have that built in. The exit ticket makes it that much more innovative because people are actually verbalizing it to leave. So the last thing they're telling you before they leave is what they plan to do, the action they plan to take, the knowledge that they have increased. And so it's more likely to stick with them, but it is also, again, a consistent structure to your class that lets people know that you really are action focused. You want them to take something away from class. So exit tickets, you can actually collect them. A lot of people do, and put them in folders. For adults, that may be helpful. They may have their own notebooks. They may even be able to show you their phone. And again, that's a way to bring in some of that technology in, write it in the notes app on your phone, or however you want to do it. But I need to see this before you exit. Tech, yes. Even if you're not doing the online version of classes, you need some tech, you do. And so it's up to you. There are very basic tech things where you can pull out your phone and, play audio or video, but you definitely need to include something other than your voice and paper if you want to be innovative, right? So I didn't say, don't say Sister Crutchfield said that paper and just me are bad. I didn't say that. I said, remember, there's a spectrum. And so teachers are at different places. And so if you're at the level where you really want to be innovative, impactful, some of the best practices are including technology, how best you see fit, but definitely including it, especially post-pandemic. We are there. These students are there. And so Kahoot is something popular if you're at the Marsalis Avenue Church of Christ. This is the game that we played in 2022 at the Black History Month program, where you're able to use your phone and answer questions up on a screen. Students, if you're in K-12, love that. It's competitive. You know, there's a winner, there's a leaders board, and you can easily check for understanding, do a poll. There's polls that are a little bit more mature, but you still use your phone to respond to questions. It's not as big of a competition, but you still get that response, and the class can see what it is that the rest of their classmates feel like or what they think. And so yourself then and your personality, this is the easiest part of innovation, right? Is including your own personality, including examples about yourself, examples about your life, and spicing it up however you see fit. But making sure that that comes across, right? Because those are the things when you hear people describe Bible study teachers and experiences that they've added their personality to it, their own flair. All right, so here's an example of this exit ticket kind of check-in level of understanding. You see the different levels of the battery, right? Even somebody circling, especially for, children in Bible class, it might be simple for them to say, I have kind of medium understanding of what you were talking about. Don't really understand the resurrection or the Holy Trinity. So, I'm at a medium, I'm at a low. This helps you to be able to gauge if you need to review that. If all of your students are at low, at medium, nobody's at high, you probably need to review that. And so that's just an innovative way, instead of saying, hey, raise your hand if you understand. It's a different way. And it gives them the flexibility to not just say yes or no, but to say, kind of in the middle, understand a little bit about it. So again, innovative ways that are just ideas to get the same material, the same points, the same questions across in more exciting ways to bring that to your Bible class. All right, and so our last slide here are just some of those tech ideas that I talked about. If you look at Kahoot here, to the right, you have a triangle, diamond, square, and circle. That's usually what people are seeing on their phones. And those things correspond to the answers. So the red answer here says Thomas Edison. That corresponds to the triangle. The blue diamond corresponds to Benjamin Franklin. So whatever your questions might be, right? How many books of the Bible are there? So you might in the red have 66, you might have 25, 75, and students answer by clicking. And so the faster you answer correctly, you get more points in Kahoot. If you answer quickly but wrong, you don't get points, right? So the idea is to make sure that you're getting those questions right. Students love this, absolutely love it. Adults probably love it too. Slido is one that more adults use. And so you can see the difference. It's not as colorful, but it gives you a percentage, right? And so think about those discussion prompts that I talked about. If the discussion prompt is, how are we feeling about, this war in Ukraine? Maybe you have answers that say, not really tuned into it, feeling bad about it, really concerned, not at all concerned. And so maybe those things will show up on the poll, and that might be a lead into talking about, war and conflict in scripture, because we know there was plenty of that, right, with the children of Israel. So again, these are simple things, Kahoot.com, Slido.com, that you go in, you have free accounts, and you set it up so that way you can bring that tech in. So those are things, some of us don't want to kind of shift and stretch and say, I'm going to do that. But the last slide, I got everybody. Everybody can pull out their phone and pull out a YouTube video and have your students go to it, or have it connected to a screen and play something that somebody else is saying about the topic. You think about it, we don't often do that. We have our own scripts, we have our own thinking, But sometimes it comes across very well for the concept that we have to be shown from a movie. Most of us have Netflix accounts or Hulu. So pull up a video or a clip that demonstrates the point that you're trying to make in Bible class and show it. I remember when we were teaching via Zoom in the pandemic, the students really loved, there was, I think it's maybe the Prince of Egypt. I think that was it, talking about the story of Joseph. So I would coordinate not only the lesson in scripture, but I would coordinate that part of the movie. So they're seeing it actualized, right? They're seeing it animated. Okay, this is what this means and what it looks like in real life. And so it may not be a movie, it may just be a podcast, right? That you're able to play the audio for, because people can say stuff really elegantly. They can really drive it home. So in addition to you listening to that as a teacher and your preparation, and we study and we watch things and we read things to prepare our lesson, we give our students access to that. We let them lean in, and you never know, that might be a podcast or something that they subscribe to. So not only have you introduced that information in your class, but now your students also have subscribed to something that will improve their daily Christian walk. And so they're hearing that all the time. All right, so audio and video for sure are simple things. If you can't get with the Slido, with the polls, with the Kahoot, I encourage you to try those things and just fool around with them. If you have nieces, nephews, grandkids, or children, they know what this is. So ask them for assistance, and maybe that'll be something I can come back and talk more about, are these tech ideas the next time. So I hope that you, whatever level of teaching you're at, if you're a brand new Bible study teacher, you found some things that can bring you comfort, particularly in that preparation section, right? Just knowing the ins and outs of your class, where it's going to be located, how you want it to be set up, how you're going to teach it, those day one norms and what people should expect and try to bring. I even send out a newsletter, and I teach generally elementary, middle, but for parents, for students, this is me, this is my background, and these are the expectations, right? Are we going to have memory verses? Are we going to have a treasure box? All of those things so people know ahead of time. Then moving into communication, we know how to communicate. And so as a Bible study teacher, we need to remember that we can't over communicate. Discussion, right? So it may be a little tricky if you're a newer Bible study teacher in terms of how to incorporate discussion. And so I gave you those examples of putting it as a prompt at the beginning and then letting people work in small groups, but just making sure that you're timing it so that you're not doing what I'm doing now, right? So this is great for your learning, but if this was a Bible study and I had talked this entire time, that's not very effective. You need your students to talk back to you. And so discussion is very important. And then lastly, this innovation. If you're comfortable to go there, test yourself. You know, if you're teaching for 3 months, say at least one Sunday out of every month, I'm going to make sure that I include some type of technology. You can start slow and build, but definitely give it a try. So hopefully this was helpful to everyone. I enjoy sharing these tips and ideas, and I'm glad that there's this resource for the Bible study teachers out there. So you guys take care.